All right, everybody, we are back. This is Creativity is the Cure. I am your host, Malcolm Moore, and today I have a very special guest, my good friend, Markus Reuter. How are you doing today, Markus?
Hey, I'm doing well. I'm doing well. I was just on vacation for 2 weeks, so I should be relaxed um, and balanced, well balanced. My mood and my body is actually, yeah. I spent about 3 hours in the Mediterranean Sea per day,
Ooh,
and it was great. Yeah.
that sounds wonderful. Where are you talking to us from today?
I'm at home in Berlin, Germany, and I live in a part of town that is very friendly, family orientated. Um, I really enjoy it very much here. It's a place where I can go for walks even at night. I moved here about 11 years ago, so I'm not originally from Berlin. I'm actually from the western side of Germany. I grew up in much more of an industrial and working class kind of place. So in a way, like ending up in Berlin was just perfect for me. And I took a couple detours, but I'm really, really happy here in the capital.
What's the weather like over there?
It's pretty much like I would say like northern East Coast weather. So like New York or something.
That
So it's
makes
really
sense.
warm.
I grew up in Rochester, New York, so it's probably similar to that, right?
Yes, it is very similar, exactly. But it doesn't get as cold in the winters here.
Yeah,
So because you're closer to the lake. So
that is true.
I mean you're
Yes.
at the lake, right?
We got
So
the lake effect. Yes, that is true.
yes.
Well, I think the first thing we need to get out of the way is how we know each other. I'm actually trying to think the first time we met. I know it was probably with Stickmen, but I was looking through my
Yeah.
notes, and I know that we had already met when I saw you with the Crimson Project. I remember it was October 2011 because remember right during the concert we found out that Steve Jobs had died. So that was easy to look that up.
Hmm.
I think that was
Hmm.
Buffalo, but I've seen you so many times with Stickmen, whether it was in New York or here in California. I'm guessing, I don't know.
Yeah, I remember the Rochester show where you opened with
Oh,
your
that's
band.
right. That's right. My band opened up for you
And
guys.
I think that was like the at least the first time that I took complete note of you, let's say.
Yes. And then I remember we,
So that must have been 2012, right?
right.
Maybe.
That sounds about right. And then, oh, okay. So 2011, I saw you with Crimson Project before that. That was a crazy, really wild concert with six of you, right? What was it? Tobias Ralph and Adrian and Tony and you. I'm trying to think. Pat was
And
in there.
Julie Slick,
Julie Slick. What a great show that was.
thank you.
So I'm going to go right to your website. It says here, I'm a musician, composer, and creative educator. Marcus, I've got to say,
Hmm.
I thought I knew your work well until I did some investigating this week. You are definitely one of the most prolific artists I've ever known in my life. I am just overwhelmed. I often listen to like Stickmen, Prog Noir, and I love your version of Breathless that you guys do by Robert Fripp, and I love the Swimming in the Tea, I think it is. But man,
Yes.
you have just done so much stuff. I think the best thing to do is let's go back in time to when you were younger. I would like to know, what is your first creative memory?
Wow, Malcolm, that's an amazing question. Like I think like this is the very first time anybody asks me that question.
Oh, good.
I have to admit that I really do not have any early memories. Like what is important to know about me that I had severe brain trauma as a 3 year old.
Really?
It
Oh
was
my
a
gosh.
car accident.
Wow.
Yeah, and it was in 75 or something. Like I was born in 72, right?
Right.
So at that time, like there were no safety belts in cars.
Yeah.
There, and in hospitals, parents weren't allowed to see their kids, like they had like visiting hours were like from 2 to 3 in the afternoon or something like that. It was a really um, hard time for kids, I would
Yeah.
say.
It was a different time.
And
I'm about 2 years older than you, so I'll remember. before all the
Yeah,
technology,
and I
right?
mean, and you know how it was, Howard. You know how it was, and so I started like finding out, like just over the last couple of decades, that I was in the hospital alone for 3 weeks as a 3-year-old with a broken skull,
Oh my
and
gosh.
whatever got damaged inside my head. Like I don't know, like nobody knows. So I might as well, like have been fine, but I don't know. I really don't know. But so the question about creativity is great because I think that the very first time that I actually became aware of that I can be consciously creative or that I can make a decision to be creative, that was when I was like maybe 20 years old. That
Oh,
was really
oh,
late,
wow.
really, really late.
Okay.
However, I have been quite creative between like age 10, I would say, and age 18 or something
Mm-hmm.
already, but not really knowing that I was creative, not really knowing that word. Like it seems insane, but with like the working class background,
Right.
like my parents, they didn't really think that way. They did support me in the sense that they sent me to music school and they bought musical instruments for me, but there was never ever any mention of the that you as a human being, one as a human being has freedom to create, you
Right.
know.
Right.
So my earliest memory really is already music related, and I think it was when I got my first like mini Yamaha keyboard, which was at age 10, I think.
Wow. So you started
And
on keyboards. I didn't know that.
no, I started before on I had the usual like glockenspiel when I was very young, and then there was like the recorder and also mandolin.
Ooh.
I think I started playing mandolin when I was 7 or something, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But that was still when I never had any experience of being creative in that with that, right? So really my first memory of being creative was with that mini keyboard and just putting my fingers on the keys and figuring out what a chord is, and then sort of like finding chord sequences,
Right.
chord progressions, right? And I
Discovering them.
remember that discovering them, that was really the first time ever where I had a conscious experience of being creative, like in so painting or drawing as a kid or something like that. I don't think I ever really um, that was never really part of my conscious experience somehow. And I don't remember ever feeling something, something positive, let's say, or energizing before I actually have started having these musical experiences.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you because, I'm a drummer, musician, and I've done a little bit of my education with the Orff Schul work.
Yes, it was Orff. Yeah.
Yeah, when you say Glockenspiel, it makes me think of those exercises. And I can see you, playing a repeated pattern in a group of people. So you're saying you did that type of instruction that was maybe notated or planned ahead. And it wasn't until you had this keyboard that you decided to just explore what you didn't even know was improvising. Would that sound right?
Yeah, and I do not, and that's the thing. Like I think that it's because of the brain trauma.
Yeah.
I really have a hard time memorizing, like particularly time before my ninth or 10th year,
Okay.
right? So what I do know as a fact, what I do remember is that when this Orff-based music education that I had
Yes.
I think probably already as a 3-year-old, right? Something like that, or
Yeah.
4 or 5-year-old, it
Right.
must have been. That we were given individual modules of a xylophone. So
Yeah.
there was probably an A, but
Right.
like the A was probably the first note I ever banged on,
Yeah.
And then like maybe 3 weeks later, they gave me an E, and so I was that is something that is still very much present in how I experience music, that everything is made up of these individual smallest units, which are like individual pitches,
Interesting.
right? So
Yeah.
that is sort of like a memory that I still have. But as I've said, it's like when I was learning to play the mandolin, for example, I think it was because the focus was so much on reading rather than on playing, right? Like
Right.
the playing was sort of like an afterthought of reading the music of the page, and there was no experience of creativity really.
Yeah.
Maybe I remember that the teacher was pointing out like, okay, like the dynamics, okay, play this softly, play this loudly,
Right.
but that never felt like something that was my own choice, or that was never like I never experienced that as an interpretation. For me, actually putting the notes, putting the pitches together, so that like means basically composing,
Right.
really was the first was what really gave me the experience, or the creative experience, let's say.
Right. Now, this is really speaking to me because when I was younger, being a drummer and percussionist in my high school, I was in jazz band and orchestra. And what a difference. Like you're talking about jazz band, we play the melody and then we're pretty much improvising. And then we play the melody again. But then
Mm-hmm.
I'd run over to do orchestra and everything is notated. And like you say, you've got to play what's written. You might be able to interpret it slightly with the conductor, but you pretty much have to follow the dynamics, the tempo, and all that stuff that's written, right?
Exactly. And it was even like deeper for me that I didn't even understand that there was a world where you were allowed to interpret. It may sound ridiculous, but it's true. Like I still feel like, looking back at my life, that maybe the first 20 years of my life felt like I was asleep, you know,
Interesting. I wasn't going to say
somehow.
this until later, but I know that you and I are fans of Gurdjieff, and I was looking at a quote that made me
Hmm.
think of you that goes right along with what you're saying. At one point, Gurdjieff said, "Awakening is possible only for those who seek it and want it, for those who are ready to struggle with themselves and work on themselves for a very long time and very persistently in order to attain it." But for you, the awakening was not planned, and it seemed like you weren't cognizant of that part of your brain until what, early 20s?
Yeah, I think it well, not early 20s. It was at age 18 that
Yeah.
I met Robert Fripp, that I went to one of his courses.
Now, was this
And it
guitar
was
craft?
this was Guitarcraft. Yeah, that was a Guitarcraft level one course in Switzerland in 1991.
For my listeners that don't know what that is, can you just give a very brief overview of what guitar craft is?
Well, I'm really not in a position to say what it really is because I don't know. I can say what it was for me.
Yeah, that's.
Um, yeah.
I understand. You don't need to explain. I understand. Go ahead.
No, it was I would even say like a complex of ideas and a complex of techniques that Robert Fripp was teaching
Right.
with the guitar,
Okay.
right? That's what I have to say. It's or through the guitar. So it was a course with, I can't remember, like 20 beginners, and then there were people that were a little bit more experienced there already, and it was very nice. It was sort of a communal experience with they were eating together, and like there were Q&As, and there were also personal meetings with Robert Fripp, and there was a lot of really fantastic group work in the circle. So where literally the guitarists were sitting in a circle
Right.
and were playing pieces together, or were circulating notes in the room. So it's very much like a real like a really deep I would say music school, a
Yeah,
school of music of sorts.
I agree.
And but it basically comes through or came through the guitar for Robert,
Right.
So it's something like where he was focusing on the picking hand also. So it was not so much about the pitches, like what was my main interest, right? It was more about technique, and it was about the fact that you could actually practice something in order to get better at it.
Right.
I don't want to say to master something, but just to get better at it. And that was just like I said before, that I had no idea that you could actually be creative, right? I also didn't know that you could actually practice something.
Yeah.
I never had a teacher that encouraged me. I never had anybody in the first 20 or 18 years of my life, because Robert Fripp changed that for me, right?
Right.
So that guitarcraft course really was a big turning point in my life, where I learned that I have some sort of control over my life, because I was able to decide that I can do something, I can practice something, I can repeatedly do something, I can acquire a habit that would change my life, mostly for the better, sometimes for the worse. But it was a great experience, and I'm really really happy and still grateful that that happened to me.
That's interesting that this awakening to your own creativity gave you a feeling of, it sounds like control, but also belongingness, and maybe defining yourself a little bit more. And I've got to ask you, because I've seen Guitarcraft live, but I've never played with it. Would you say it's a
Mhm.
combination of planned music, but also some improvisation?
Oh, yeah, for sure. And it very much developed into something that is mostly improvised, actually.
Right,
What I think it's called the orchestra of crafty guitars or something.
right.
Like, I haven't really followed the terminology much in the last 20 years or so.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's a lot of improvisational aspects in there as well. And for me, really, the turning point after Guitarcraft was that I then discovered the Chapman Stick,
Right.
started playing the Chapman Stick, and also started going to university. And I'm a psychology major, right?
Ooh, I didn't know
And
that. Wow.
during you didn't know
No, we've got a
so
lot
like
in
my
common.
first
Go ahead.
yeah. So my first years at university, I was part of a free improvising orchestra, which was
Wow.
called the Chaos Orchestra at Bielefeld University.
That sounds fun.
And so really, like, my musical awakening was sort of like the starting point was guitarcraft, but then I got into free improvisation with an amazing musician and also music teacher called Gerhard Lisken,
Yes.
who was sort of a famous free improvising musician from the 60s. So he was, when I first met him, he was already in his mid 60s, I think.
Yeah.
So Robert Fripp, just early 40s when I met him.
Right.
And then I went to like a really old teacher, and it was just amazing. And I had a completely like the opposite, almost like the opposite experience with Gerhard, with that teacher, and that musical experience, where it was pretty much like really like the other side of the coin, really, for me. And I understood that, but the approaches were so different. And I think that was really the moment where I started to understand that rather than working on myself, let's say, I started working on something that was bigger than myself, which something I would call like a more of like a holistic approach, or like thinking of one's work as a whole rather than whole with W, right?
Right. Right.
Rather than a personal sort of expression. Like, I was never really believing that I was capable of expressing something personal, but it was more about like being available for some sort of universal utterance, let's say.
Wow. That's interesting.
Um,
I'm sorry. Did some of that come out
sorry.
of being in the Chaos Orchestra?
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I think the Chaos Orchestra was really incredibly important for me,
Yeah.
because that way I had like the structured, more disciplined approach that Fripp was teaching, and on the other side was the purely free, chaotic, but also how shall I say, purely emotional and intuitive approach.
Yeah.
And I still find myself in this, that I can adopt any of these roles. Like, I could be totally disciplined. I can play like the very fast grip things, like, I
Right.
do that with tuner, for example.
Yeah.
Or I could be playing free improvised shows for hours. And I just love all these modes of working, and also all everything in between. And like, for me, improvisation and composition, they've become the same thing.
So yeah, it almost makes me think of my favorite piano player is Mike Garson, most known for playing with David Bowie, and he does these
Yes, yes.
live composing He's so good that he just
Yeah.
composes live. And you're right. Your playing makes me think of that. One of the things I love to listen to of yours in the morning is your stream for consciousness, a little series of improvs.
Yes.
But it sounds like it
Yes.
could be improv or planned out. It's a really beautiful combination.
Yeah. Thank you. I mean, that is that sort of idea I have. Also it's inspired by Robert Fripp also, because
Yes.
Robert Fripp did these what he called soundscape performances,
Right.
which was using two digital delays, and I sort of like build on that idea early on in my musical. I don't want to call it career, but like my musical research. Okay,
Right.
and I started working with like these digital delays, and basically what happens is if you're using these digital delays, you start playing, with something you played before. So you start playing to yourself, right?
Yeah.
And by doing that for many years, I sort of like acquired a skill that allows me to always like to intuitively find the spaces in the music. And when I'm
Right.
talking about space, I'm not only talking about the timeline, right?
Right.
I'm also talking about the frequency spectrum. So, like the way that I tune my ear is like to actually hear, okay, how high, which register is a note in, and I taught my body to actually pick a note that is either higher or lower than the range that the note I'm hearing is in. So I was able to fill the space, and this is like what I'm doing with the Scream for Consciousness
Right.
project, where the pieces are the notes are picked sort of randomly, but they are placed very, very consciously.
I had an amazing experience this past January. I was able to take an online course with Brian Eno. And first of all,
Yeah.
I never expected to be able to do that. But second of all, one of the biggest things that he taught me and all of us is to try to get into that stream of consciousness when you're composing. Don't think about it too much
Hmm.
and get to that place that, we talk about on my podcast a lot. Ever since then, I've been composing all my music on my little Boss looping machine that has, what is it? 1, 2, 3, 5 tracks. And there's something
Hmm.
about just not thinking about it and getting in there. What I often do is I'll do a few tracks of drums and then I'll just start playing keyboards. And then I will dump that into Ableton and start to work with it. But there's something about getting to that place of your mind where you're just almost not consciousness, you're letting the music flow through you. And so I tell that story just to ask you, is that what it's like for you? Is that what you like about looping? And it sounds like you started out with tape machines, but I'm sure you use something digital now, right?
Yeah, digital. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, exactly. And in a way, what you just said, or what we just said, also explains why I have such a huge discography,
Yeah.
because I'm able, or like I don't want to say I'm able, but I am allowing myself to create music in real time. So that's how, like, when people ask me, Marcus, do you ever sleep? And I say, yeah, I mean, I sleep a lot, and also there are long periods of time where I'm not actually creating any new music. But when I do,
Yeah.
I create a lot,
I was
right?
thinking the
So
same
I
thing.
made,
Like, does this guy sleep? I was like, God damn, look at this discography. It's a lot of
no,
stuff. Stickmen could make an album like Prog Noir. But when you guys start touring, to me, it's almost like a jazz band because you're taking these loosely constructed songs, but you might take them in a different place one night than you do another, right? You're almost building on it and going to newer compositions. Would that be accurate?
I mean, yes and no. I mean, it is true that some pieces we may play the same notes every night,
Right.
right? But I think that even within the degrees of freedom you have to play those notes, we improvise.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that really jazz improvisation has sort of, I would let me use this word, even spoiled improvisation for a lot of people, because it seems like jazz improvisation is improvisation, but that's not the case.
Right.
Improvisation is, we've used the term before, like interpretation, right?
Right.
So the interpretation of the same material is also improvisation if you're doing it with a free spirit, let's say.
Yes.
So, and I think it's particularly important when playing live, because you do want to make sure that the situation, the audience, like the vibe, really finds its way into whatever you're doing.
Do you
So if
mean,
you're kind of
but do you mean like reading the room, reading the audience? Is that what you're?
yeah, but but I'm not talking about reading as a conscious effort,
Okay.
right? I'm meaning it about as sort of like a subconscious antenna, right? Like being just open to meld with the environment.
Are
What
you
it's
saying
about.
that if you guys are playing this song and it's going well and the audience really digs it, you might stay there a little longer than you planned?
No, I mean, yes, I mean we could do that where if the piece allows for that,
Right.
but I think it's much more subtle. It's much more subtle. What I'm talking about is really the most subtle energies, right? It's really a only if I don't think about the audience, only if I don't think I need to deliver something in particular, when I'm able to actually submit myself to the room. You know, it's not about reading the room, it's about submitting myself
Interesting.
to whatever is happening, right? And that's really how the connection happens for me. And I found that this is something that I don't think I've ever learned to do. This is something I sort of was born with, I would say.
Yeah.
Because there's like an interesting story for you here, Malcolm. When I was around 15 years old, and I already told you I was not really aware of what I was doing, and I was dabbling with keyboards, and I had like some classic guitar lessons when I was 15, and so I went into a music store. I actually rode my bike for about an hour and 15 minutes to a music store, went into that music store, and it was, I must have been 86, I think. So I was 14.
Right.
And there were Warwick basses, which is a big brand these days.
Right.
They had just put out their very first basses,
Okay.
handmade basses, and it was a local company. And I picked up one of those basses, plugged it in. I'd never touched the bass before in my life, plugged it into a bass amp, and I played one note. I remember playing one note, maybe three, four, and I stopped playing. And so, like, fast forward 10 years, I run into a guy at a show, and he comes to me and says, Markus, do you remember that day that you came into the store where I was working?
Wow.
And you plugged in that bass and you played one note. And he said to me, Markus, you do not remember, but everybody turned around.
Wow.
He said that to me.
Interesting.
And he said, and he's like a serious guy. And it was the very first time I ever played a bass guitar. I ever played an electric instrument, actually. And he said to me, people turned around. And somehow that sort of like struck a note in me, like, because I realized maybe he's right. Maybe what he's saying is not made up. Maybe it's not something that, because I do feel that I have some sort of special connection with music.
Yeah.
So, and it has nothing to do with being good at playing or good at something in particular. It's sort of like a sort of like, maybe also not a good word, but maybe some sort of respect for sound, or even respect for emotions, or for putting an envelope onto life.
Yeah.
And somehow, that's why I'm still thinking at some point I want to make an album that's called "And People Turned Around" or something like that.
It sounds like that was the beginning or the dawning or the awakening of who you truly were, right? It's like you found your way home by hitting that one note.
Yeah, but I wasn't aware of that at all.
Yeah.
And it took another 5 years before,
But other
like
people
4
were
years.
aware. That's what's fascinating.
Yeah, and I still find that's something that kind of makes total sense to me, because also the music or the players that I enjoy do that to me, right? So people play one note, and that one note actually changes the room.
Yes.
That's sort of like what for me makes a great musician is like, is there a difference between like silence in the room and somebody making a noise? Right?
I would
Like,
think so.
and
Yeah.
and what is that? But what is that difference? Right? That's what's important. What's the quality
Right.
of that difference? Right? So somebody could just make a noise, yeah, but somebody playing that one note that actually just makes you listen or draws your attention in some sort of way.
Yeah.
That's really what it's about, right? And as we know, as musicians and just human beings, that there are so many different qualities with which you can make a noise, right? And most of them are not pleasant, but some are.
I love that. Or some are not pleasant to some people, but beautiful to others, right?
Yeah, yeah, and that's the way it is, right?
Whenever, I was telling some people that I'm going to go see Stickmen, they're like, what is that? And then I tried to describe it, and then I was just like, you just got to go. It's really hard to explain what the three of you do live. And for people out there, it's Markus and Tony Levin and Pat Mastelotto. Incredible group.
Yes.
And I wanted to ask you, how did you originally end up playing with Stickmen?
It's also a long story. Obviously, it started when I went to that first guitarcraft course.
Right.
So I established a relationship with Robert Fripp, which was kind of very nice. Like he's known to be a difficult person, but with me, he never was like that.
Right.
He really was very supportive, and like I love telling this story. Like the very first time I met him was on the corridor in a castle in Switzerland, and he had his nightgown on, a white nightgown. And I asked him, Robert, where are you going, or what are you doing? I said probably, and he said, I'm going for a piss. That was the very first thing he ever said to me, and that was sort of like the casualness of our exchange,
Yeah.
and he was just a fantastic teacher for me. And I maybe had like 45 minutes of personal time with him in my life, really.
Yeah.
But those 45 minutes were extremely important. And so as a result of that, I got into King Crimson. I went to see live shows. And in the year 2000, when I saw King Crimson in Munich, Germany, and after the show, I saw Pat and Trey by the side of the stage. And the next morning, I took a train to northern Germany, and I met Pat and Trey on the train by accident. We were sitting together, and I mean, I already had met Trey previously for a course. Anyway, I knew him already, so I started talking with Pat, and Pat and I we hit it off, and I became Pat's webmaster. I was his webmaster for 5 years.
I didn't know that. That's really cool.
So, and in 2005, Pat invited me over to make music together.
Oh, wow.
And that's how we started the Tuna project. And
this was before Stickmen?
Yeah, this was 5 years before Stickmen.
I thought it was the other way around. Go ahead. Keep telling me.
Yeah, and so Tony recorded an album called Stickman.
Right.
If you remember that.
With Michael Bernier.
And
right.
No, that was before Michael Bernier. That was a solo record he did called Stickman.
Oh, right.
M-A-N.
That's one when he did the video of he was in the bathroom with the people tap dancing.
Exactly. Exactly. And that was the record that Pat played the drums on.
Right.
Right. And I was at Pat's place in Austin when Tony sent the music for Pat to play to. Mm-hmm. So I was really there at the birth of the project and of the idea of making music exclusively with Chapman Stick.
That's
and
fascinating.
Drums.
I had no idea. That is really cool.
Yeah. So I was really close there, and then but they started, as you know, the band with Michael Bernier because Michael was a local in Kingston, New York.
Yeah, he's a great player.
Yeah, and so Tony, Pat, and Michael, they played together for maybe 2 years or something. Not exactly sure about that timeline.
Right.
And in August 2010, I remember I got an email from Pat asking me, would you like to join the band? Michael has left the band. And,
just like that.
Yeah, just like that. And, to be quite honest, I wasn't really a big fan of the music.
Right.
at that time. It wasn't really, it was just a little bit, I don't even know how to describe it, right? But I wasn't a big fan. And I allowed myself to sleep on it for a night, you know?
Right.
So the next morning, I wrote back and I said, yeah, of course I'm in. There's another like funny story related to this because around 2008 or so, I had a conversation with Pat where I was saying, "Oh, Pat, I really would love to play more because I was not really playing much live at all before Stickman, right?" And I remember Pat saying to me, "Be careful for what you wish for or what you ask for." And yeah, it was like a year or two later that Pat invited me to play with Stickman, and now I think we've played 600 or 700 shows together.
Oh my gosh.
Like it's
Yeah. How many years
it's
has
our
it been?
15th year together
Wow.
now
Wow. That's incredible.
with me. Well, so the band is almost, I guess, 18 years old or something.
Yeah. How did you go from Chapman Stick to making your own touch guitar? And let me just tell everybody out there, a Chapman Stick,
Mm.
and correct me if I'm wrong, is either a 10 or a 12 string instrument. It kind of looks like a gigantic neck of a guitar, but that's all it is. And
hmm
with one hand, you play the bass line, and the other hand, you play the chords. Am I correct about that?
Yeah, that's the way that Emmett Chapman, the inventor of the stick, like that's how he defined the technique.
It's more tapping than plucking, right? In most cases.
Yeah, tapping means that you're just pushing the finger down on the string,
Yeah.
or you're pushing the string down onto the fret, and that's how you're making the string vibrate. So you don't need a strumming hand or picking hand.
Right.
You just as you fret, you also put the energy into the string. You can use all 8 fingers or even the thumbs if you wanted to play notes on the fretboard.
When you plug it into an amplifier, do I have this correct that, with the bass notes, you want a bass sound, and with the higher notes, you want a high sound? So do people often use a bass amp and a guitar amp, or how do they separate the two distinct ranges?
Yeah, exactly. You would just use 2 lines for that, like could be direct or could be going through an amp. Yes. I started playing an 8 string instrument in 97.
What was that?
And I haven't, so the 8 string instrument is just a monophonic instrument. It's just one run of strings, not two, not two.
Okay.
I had made the experience I was an avid Chapman Stick seminar goer. I
Yeah.
was taking classes with other players, and I was seeing that people were hitting the ceiling very, very quickly, the ceiling of accomplishment, let's say,
Right.
right? And I was always wondering what's going on here. What is it? What is it a problem? Is it a problem of blah blah blah? It turned out that it was a multitude of things that made the Chapman Stick very limiting in certain ways.
Okay.
Right? It's rather simple, let's say, or easy to produce something that sounds cool, right?
Okay.
But once you want to go outside of what is easy to do, let's say,
Right.
it gets so incredibly hard that only very few people were able to break through that ceiling. Yes, and one of the issues is the two sections of strings, and the strings, they are strung in opposite directions, and they have two tunings. The one is in fourth, one is in fifth. And so I was just realizing it's too much. It's too much for human brains. And that's why I decided to go just for one set of strings and tune in fifth, so not the usual guitar tuning. And that's what I've been playing ever since. It's a wonderful thing because also like having less strings and no overlapping strings, because happens with the 10-string stick or the 12-string stick, is
Right.
that you have the same strings available twice. Yeah, which means that you can play overlapping parts easily.
Right.
With my instrument, it's more like it unifies the hands and it unifies the hemispheres of the brain,
Hmm.
and it's a wonderful thing. So my approach was going from the unified, what shall I say, like aspect of experiencing or exploring that instrument to being able to play two parts at the same time, or to play complicated rhythms, or to play polyphonic parts, or to play complex polyrhythms and stuff like that. But for me, it was like going from being able to play it in a unified way to doing the more complex things, let's say. Where a lot of people that started with a Chapman Stick, they were overwhelmed by the possibilities and by the idea that you have to play two different parts, or that you have to play a bass line or
Oh,
a bass
right.
note and a chord and a melody,
Yeah.
right? And that was one of the psychological effects that I had identified why people got stuck early with that instrument. And so that's why I said, okay, like for the technique that I'm going to develop, I'm going to just focus on how do I play a note that's beautiful, how do I play a loud note, how do I play a soft note, how do I end the note? How can the note have a beautiful ending? How does phrasing work? How can notes get connected? And all of these, right, like more basic concepts, but very, very important concepts for music and for musical expression. I think it's always hard and it's always difficult if you start with if you're shooting or aiming too high when you're starting to make music. It can get so frustrating, and it can give you lots of opportunities to acquire very bad habits
Right.
that may take a lifetime to get rid of. So that's why I'm a proponent of keep it simple and work on the basics until you feel comfortable enough. And I see that. I don't know, like you're the specialist with this, but like even if I see the way that people teach guitarists to play guitar, starting out playing an F chord or a C chord or even a D chord or something like that.
Right.
I think for a lot of beginners, it's just too much already. Like because if you have a physically uncomfortable experience making music,
Right.
I think that's what sticks with you. It's not that the music may be nice that sticks with you. It's that it felt horrible that sticks with you. And so that's why I think it's kind of important to build people's muscles a little bit, let's say, right?
Right.
Or calluses even, if we want to go that way.
Yeah.
Like before they are asked to make music, right? I mean, especially talking about guitar instruments, obviously with the piano, for example, it's a little bit different.
Talking to my friend David Wish yesterday, he runs this nonprofit called Music Will that gets instruments to kids who can't afford them. So one thing he developed over the years is something called Modern Band that I realized I was doing the same thing. Elvis Costello has a book about playing guitar like this. There's something about when I teach kids, especially private drum lessons, right away, I try to get them to play a song they like. So they walk away from that first lesson being excited and feeling good about themselves. So when we get to the point that we have to do rudiments or another instrument do scales, they're already invested. They've got to feel confident. They've got to feel good about themselves. And that will draw them into the more complexities of music like yours or a Frank Zappa or Prince or someone like that. And so my question for you is, if you were playing Chapman Stick, invented by Emmett Chapman, what led you to, instead of just grabbing a guitar or bass, why did you create your own instrument?
First of all, I still think like the idea of the Chapman Stick is wonderful,
Right.
right? And it just turned out that ergonomically and both physically and mentally, it didn't really work for me,
Right.
but also for many others that I've experienced. So that's why at some point I realized, um, once when I had been playing for about 13 years, I think, when I had the idea to build my own instrument. I wanted to build an instrument that is a traditional guitar instrument that I inject or infuse with my knowledge about the technique. Right. So I didn't want to invent or reinvent the wheel and invent a new instrument.
Right.
Um, I wanted to have the luthier that I worked with at Reynolds built an instrument, a traditional guitar instrument. And I was very specific. I said, I want this to be a real guitar instrument where you, as a specialist for guitar, you can say, this is a great instrument.
Right.
Right. I said, but we need to make sure that this and this and this works. And that's how we came up with this instrument that I called the Universal 8. Short, it's U8.
Right.
And that is the prototype. We built the prototype in around 2007, I think. And first series of instruments was built in late 2009. I sold all of those instruments in early 2010. It was a big success.
Wow.
And over the years, now around 300 instruments are out there.
The touch guitar, what is the difference between that and the U8?
Touch guitar is the brand name, and the U8 is the model.
Oh, okay.
That's what it is. So it's the Touch Guitars is the brand. Touch Guitars U8 is the full name of the model.
For my students who are guitarists or bass players, how is the U8 different from a regular guitar or bass?
It's the details, right? So it is like if you pick it up as somebody who has ever held a guitar or a bass, it feels a little bit different, but it still is a guitar. You can pick it up. You realize, okay, if you put a finger on a string, the note just starts resonating immediately. Like you don't need to put effort in it. You don't have to hit hard. You don't have to put any pressure on it. You can use all 8 fingers. It works on the very low strings, the very high strings. It's sort of like a comfort. It's a very comfortable instrument, and it does not feel like something that's coming from another planet. And that has turned out to be like the most, really, like it's the most positive feature about the instrument, really,
right?
That anybody who picks it up, like obviously, if somebody is already sort of, should I say, tense with a normal guitar or with a normal bass or a regular bass and regular guitar, that tension carries over when you play another instrument, right? So then it's about like undoing that. But I have like had amazing experiences with like total beginners, like people in their 40s and 50s, like that have never played any instrument,
right?
Pick up the Touch Guitars U8, and they can make a note, they can play a note, and they understand simple concepts like, okay, if you have to end a note, you release the finger, but you leave the finger on the string, for example, right?
Yeah.
Something very basic, something very simple, but like it makes total sense. It's something that I think in the end is easier to learn as a beginner than a regular guitar, because on a regular guitar you have to coordinate the 2 hands, the fretting and the picking. Where on the touch guitar, it's just that one finger coming down on the string. You have an immediate experience of the physical contact with the string, right? And you sort of, because the instrument actually resonates and vibrates under your finger, even if it's like subconscious first, you can actually feel it. You feel the frequency, you feel the vibration of the instrument in your finger. So it's very, very immediate.
It sounds
it's fantastic.
It sounds very intuitive. It sounds almost like the iPhone of stringed instruments.
I really think it is. I really think it is. It's also like when you're thinking of playing drums, for example, right?
Right.
You hit the drum, and you like in order for the drum to resonate, you have to take the stick off the drum.
Right.
Right. That's how you play an open note on a tom, right?
Right.
But with a touch guitar, you actually put the finger down on the string and you leave the finger on the string, and your body actually experiences the note, not just by hearing it. It's not just the air that moves. You're experiencing the actual instrument, the actual object vibrate under your fingertip. And that's what makes it so beautiful. And that's also one of the reasons, and David, correct me if I'm wrong, but why it's possible to emote with a touch instrument in a very, very subtle way. Like, because any sort of vibration in the finger also translates onto the string. And there's no second hand that interferes with that initial impact that the finger has on the string.
Wow. Now I'm even more fascinated and excited to see you guys play. I had no idea all these attributes that you're telling me. Wow. I've been lucky enough to see Steve Gadd play drums up close a lot. And one thing I learned from him is, although you said that, yes, when you hit the stick, you draw the sound up by pulling the stick back, whether it's a cymbal or drum. But one really cool thing he does, and it took me forever to figure out how to do this, is he'll often hit a cymbal but leave a stick on it for a whole other vibe. And the more you learn to do this, it almost sounds similar to what you're saying you're doing on the U8. You're really feeling the inside of the instrument.
Exactly. And I mean, like what I was saying is like, obviously drummers can do that as well.
Yeah.
But it's with it for the drummer, it is the way how you connect the notes, how you connect the hits on the instrument.
Right.
So for example, if I think of players like, obviously Steve Gadd, but also Jeremy Stacey. I don't know if you're aware of Jeremy Stacey's playing, or like Pierre Moulin, like one of my favorite drummers.
Right.
Like they play the drum kit as if it's one instrument.
Right.
It's not a collection of things you hit. It's like it's one instrument, and when they hit a tom, the whole shell, the whole frame vibrates, the whole kit vibrates. So it's much less of an idea of having individual, like a drum machine, right, where everything is separate.
Right.
Right. Like a lot of players these days, they play like that. But I think what makes the drums so beautiful is that there's a way to play legato on drums.
Yes.
You can play legato on toms.
Right.
You know what I mean, right?
Exactly.
And I wouldn't know how to do it, but I hear it and I see people do it.
You know who does that very well is Pat Metheny. Put out this great album long ago called Bright Size Life with Jaco Pastorius. And the drummer is Bob Moses. He mostly plays with the snares off, and it sounds very tribal. And now that you describe this, that's who I thought of right away, because I don't think of, oh, he's hitting the snare drum, he's hitting the bass drum or a cymbal. It's all one big thing. And then to go beyond that, I think that's why Tony Levin's my favorite bass player, because I never think, oh, he's playing a riff, he's doing something complicated or it's simple. He just sounds like a voice. I don't even think about bass. He's so melodic that I just hear the music coming through his personality. And that seems to go back to what you're saying here.
Exactly. And Malcolm, let me be so bold and say that what we just described, or what you just described about Tony, that is music.
Yeah.
That is sort of like the definition of what music really is. And I'm not saying that you can't, like, it's absolutely wonderful to be learning music and to not doing it musically, right?
Right.
But I think it is possible as a music teacher to give your student the experience of music. And I think that is very, very important. And I think also that's what you meant when you were talking about having your student, having the experience of playing a song and getting kind of like excited by that in the first class, in the first lesson, right?
Yeah.
And it's because music, I think, is really something that you could say it's ineffable to really say what it is. But then if you are a musician, you know what it is, even though you can't really describe it.
Yeah, it sounds like the song in Discipline, what they're talking about. And along those lines with a lot of my students, especially guitar and bass players and piano players, I always say, look, or drummers, do what you can. If you're a drummer, learn all your rudiments, learn independence between your limbs. If you're playing a pitched instrument like a bass, guitar, piano, please learn all your scales, learn all your chords, learn all your modes. But when you get up there to perform, don't think about all that crap. Throw it away and just try to focus on getting that creative idea from your brain and executing it and bringing it into the physical realm. You know what I mean? And there's so many players that I like that play simply and people that I like that play complicated, and there are a few that can do both. But it comes down to what we were saying about Tony or about what you like to do or Bob Moses. Just think about the music.
Yes.
Try to sing through whatever you're doing, whether it's your voice or your instrument.
Yeah, and I still think, Malcolm, that also here we have a continuum of options, right? Like it could be For example, you could just play your instrument completely just gesture based,
Right.
right? Rather than knowing anything about the instrument, you just think of gestures. You just move your limbs. You don't need to be able to play in time. Right? Let's say in order to play the drums,
Right.
you can just hit them,
Yeah.
right? Or on the other end, let's say, is like you're highly trained and you can think, like say on a guitar, you can think, okay, I'm gonna play a D sharp on the third string,
Right.
and you're just gonna play that note, right? And I think both is very both of these approaches are very valid,
Yes.
right? But I think that what the master musician is capable of doing is to oscillate between these states.
Right.
So you can sort of like in the musical flow, you can decide to be completely intuitive and free, right?
Right.
Or you could decide, okay, at the end of this phrase, I do want to end up on a note on the D because this tune is an E minor and it's going to sound awesome to end on the seventh,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
that kind of thought is allowed too.
Right.
And I think there's just a continuum of options of like how aware do I want to be? Like how precise do I want to be? Do I care about the pitches? Do I care about being aware, or do I care about being in time? Do I need to know what subdivision I'm on? You can be, but you don't have to be. And I think that's the beauty of music, that like once you have the freedom to roam that space freely, right?
Yeah.
You can go from being totally conscious and aware of what you're doing to being completely chaotic and not even present, and still music would find its way to speak through you.
Absolutely. I mean, it makes me think of Sun Ra. I still don't understand what's happening, but I love to listen to it. There's also, there's a lot of movements in music like punk and goth where people just grabbed instruments. They had no idea how to play them, but they kept doing it and they developed their own style. And then the other one I think of is my friend Jeff and I just went to see Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even know how to describe the music. It's so crazy.
Yeah.
I look at this band of people, and including Nick too, astounding songwriter.
Mm-hmm.
But none of these guys are what I would call virtuosos. They can't play every genre perfectly. But when they get together, this magic happens musically that can't be explained or notated. It's one of the most musical, visual experiences I've had in my life. And it's like Stickman. I can't describe it to anyone. You have to get there. You have to experience it. And part of me doesn't even want to break it down because I don't want to lose the magic,
Hey man, that's a comparison there, like Nick the Bad Seeds and Stickman.
Yeah, boy, if you get to see them on tour, their recent tour, just astounding. It was
Yeah, it's
otherworldly.
just amazing.
I was just
Just
like, look,
incredible.
nobody needs to take
Yeah.
drugs. Just go see this show. And I would say that about Stickmen too.
Yes, but there you go. Like the music, the form, let's say, that the music takes, or the genre, or the compositions, like the anything that you could describe as form, really, in the end doesn't matter, right? In the end, it is like how does it become music?
Yeah.
How does it I can't find the word right now. Like how does it go beyond what it is on paper?
Yeah.
And that is just fascinating. And for me, that's what just keeps me motivated, and that also what keeps me interested in in keeping up the research. But I actually call it research because there's still so much to discover, and you know that there are lots of jaded people, especially also in the music teacher community, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Unfortunately, where people get jaded and they say, "Oh, there's really nothing new under the sun. It's only just
Right.
recombination of old stuff." And I find that horrible, like when that happens, because it's sort of like I think there is still like the magic is really independent of the fact that the materials can get recycled, let's say, right? But the magic has nothing to do with that. It's sort of on a completely different level, or a spiritual sphere, let's say, even.
Right.
You know?
Well, and I think it's fascinating for me as a teacher. When I grew up, people were playing to metronomes, but a lot of the music breathed a little more, whether it was I was listening to King Crimson or Bauhaus or the Police, you know, how the tempos would change, things like that. And with the
Yeah.
younger kids that I most recently taught, who are, I'd say, 4th to 8th grade, part of me goes, oh my God, you know, I do want to hear the music they like, but I don't want to hear anything with auto-tune and beat detective. It's too boring. But what I tried to do and realized finally is I put myself in their shoes. I looked at all their faces when they were playing me things they liked, like Olivia Rodrigo and Chaperone and Lord and Tyler, the Creator. And at first, if I just listened to it by myself, I'm like, not my cup of tea. But when I'm in a room with 30 of these kids and they're excited and they're singing along, I have to go, okay, there's something to this. This is what they're growing up with. This is what they're excited about. And I've got to say, they turned me on to all kinds of artists that I never would have been. So I really think trying to gain other people's perspectives is also very important with music.
For sure. And that's what I'm saying. Like, music is really not about the form or the thing itself. Music is this how it's being experienced. Music is an experience, right? And so I'm the last person to judge. Like, obviously, like, I can say that something doesn't speak to me immediately or something, but I know for a fact that with exposure, right, I'm gonna like any music.
Yeah.
I mean that in the most positive way. Like remembering, for example, like going to like even sitting in a hotel bar and having like four on the floor, like where you're only hearing the kick drum, let's say,
Right,
right?
right.
And I'm gonna start moving to it. Like,
Yeah.
I don't care.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just music. In that moment, like, me, my experience is like, in a way, it's even, you could say, potentially even a decision you're making as a human being. Like, do I want to allow to get moved? And I mean that uh, literally. Right? Like, do I want to allow myself to get moved? Yeah. Why would you say no to that? You know?
Yeah.
And that's like, probably there were people going to the um, at the Nick Cave show, for example, that weren't moved, but it wasn't because the music wasn't there. It was because they somehow were in a bad mood or whatever. So it
Yeah.
didn't they didn't catch it,
Didn't make the
right?
connection. Yeah.
And so, yeah, it didn't make the connection. So, and I think, like, with popular pop music nowadays, yeah, it's about the people who listen to it and who enjoy it and who have sort of emotional slash musical experiences with it. The funny way, I just realized that emotional and musical, you could be the same. You could say it's the same, because, like, what is a musical experience? The musical experience is through emotions,
Yes.
really.
I agree. And I remember when the kids were first playing, actually, it was my younger son first played me Olivia Rodrigo. He played this song called Bad Idea, right? And I'm listening. I'm like, oh, that's a pretty good song. And then the guitar solo came on. I'm like, whoa, this is not normal. This sounds like Adrian Belew. And I looked at the liner notes. It wasn't Adrian. But I'm like, wow, these younger people and the producer and all this, they're into a lot of stuff I like. There's a connection. And then I started to
Yes.
delve deeper into it. And I also think with modern music that younger people like, I've got to say this. It's really riff heavy. The melodies are strong. I think the competition is fierce. So you get these songs where, maybe 8 people sat down together and helped Taylor Swift write a song. But there's something to be said about the fact that whether you like it or not, I go home and these melodies are in my head. So there's just as much talent to creating music like that is made for the masses as a lot of the bizarre, obscure music I listen to at home. All the above are good, and it depends on the eyes of the beholder or the ears.
Of course. And I think there's been an explosion of creativity, um, and also ability. If you think about it, like the amazing stuff that young guitarists can play,
Yeah.
or drummers, like all, like still, I think that like there's one thing that you can't buy, which is experience, or which is time spent on this planet, right?
Right.
So obviously an 18-year-old doesn't have that, but technically, and also and technically is not even a good word, but the ability, the skill level that people have these days is just insane. And so that's why I think that there is potentially a bright future for music, if we also, going back to like the educational aspect, if music teachers, or let's say teachers in general, are able to get people interested in the arts. And when I say in the arts, what I mean is like the term that we started our conversation with, which is creativity.
Yeah.
Like that you actually, as a human being, you have a choice, and you can actually be creative, but you have to understand what that means.
Absolutely.
That it's not necessarily about you being required to copy what somebody else is doing or was doing,
Right.
and you're allowed to to make an utterance that is just completely you.
Yeah, and that's why I love people like Tom Waits, and I've I've said this on other interviews, but boy, his album
Mm.
Bone Machine, oh that, and
Yes.
it's mostly Brain playing drums, great drummer. When I read an
Yes.
article about how most of the drums were played with human or animal bones as sticks, and then just wailing on metal, and just the undertones and that's Tom being himself. He doesn't bow down to anybody's directions on how to make music. And I think that's the epitome of being yourself. And that's what I'm drawn to.
Exactly. And that's sort of the what we as teachers really should try to convey somehow. Like, and again, it's not about forcing anybody to understand, but like, what comes to mind for me right now is the Leonard Bernstein, the talks that he did, when was that, in the 60s or
Yes.
early 70s.
Yes.
That, believe it or not, I did see those as a child. And I
Wow.
don't think I even understood them,
Right. Right.
because it was in English, or maybe they were even overdubbed in with German language. I don't remember, but it's sort of like that kind of, um, it's like maybe people who watch those talks, like only a small percentage of those people became musicians, but maybe a lot of those people became music lovers because of that.
Right.
And that's sort of like what counts, because like we also need the people who listen, right? And to me, music fans, music lovers, music listeners are musicians as well. And those people are creative as well, because they are opening their minds to being inspired, and they are allowing something to be built within their worlds. And I
That's
think
a
that's like something that we hardly ever think about, that there's also that side, the listener.
that's a beautiful idea. I really like how you're pointing out how important the audience is and their engagement. Tell me a little bit about working with Andy Toomey.
I mean, Andy had been like working and had been like using Tony and Jerry Marotta and for some of his productions. And last year he invited Pat, Tony, and I to have a session with him, because we had a day off on tour. And we thought, yeah, that's a great time to spend, great reason to spend a day off in the studio to make some music
Right.
together. And that's how I got to know him. And the funny thing is that something that I have realized is that there are a lot of musicians out there that are extremely talented, but they appear to me to never have gotten any support.
Yeah.
right? Not like, and talking about, say, like production support, right? So any like feedback, like simple things like, like, and it happens to a lot of us, let's say, in the creative fields, that you may be making something, but you go for like years, sometimes decades, and nobody says anything.
Right.
Nobody tells you this was beautiful, or I like that, or that speaks to me. Or maybe also somebody, why, like why did you do that? Can you, if you had stopped 5 minutes earlier, it would be a great painting. But somehow this last thing, I don't like it, or like
Yeah.
any, and I think I was really hungry also for feedback for a long time. And with Andy, I kind of saw that he had some sort of style, not style, but sort of,
Well, he's
um,
got a voice.
uh, he's got a voice and some sort of vision, for lack of a
Yeah.
term, like not a big vision, but like he had something really unique about him. And I was just thinking, okay, because once he started working with the material that we recorded there, I could see that he doesn't have much experience or not much skill to actually produce it himself. But he also didn't have anybody else helping him with that. So I was thinking, okay, let's see what we can do if I produce it, if I ask a friend to produce it for him,
Yeah.
right? That's how we did the first record. And then the second record we did together, it's called Petito's Place, and he was already on a whole another level then. Like that record was, we improvised
Yeah.
those songs
Oh,
in the
wow.
studio. Like in one day, we came up with the compositions and everything in the studio at Scott's Place, and it's wonderful. And we've just done another session here in Berlin at the Tritone Studios, which is a famous studio here,
Right.
and that turned out great again. And I just like, like it's also part of I guess part of my teacher gene,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that I like collaborating with people that actually, and I hate to say it this way, but I'm going to say it, that need to learn something.
Oh, that's fine. I mean, and
Yeah.
I'm sure that when you, just like me, I'm sure when you teach somebody or help somebody, you come away learning yourself things too. Would you say that's correct?
No, of course, all the time.
So it's reciprocal, and I think
Yeah.
it's really important
Yes.
what you're doing. And those recordings are beautiful. I think I heard one too with Zach Alford, drummer from David Bowie, and Psychedelic Furs was on one of those too. Just incredible,
Yes. Yeah,
incredible
he's
music.
on that whole second EP we did together. I think it's really important that at some point, as a musician, let's say, or as an artist even, it is important that one is opening up to the idea that you are also a mentor. And you're a mentor simply by making music, because people listening to your music, and they may get inspired by it. So you're a mentor anyway.
Right.
And so if people sort of like cross your path and you realize, okay, like they could use my help, right? Then I'm like really happy to, and I don't mean this in any way in a negative way. It's just like realizing that there's some sort of connection, and that we should work together. And I'm like not judgmental there. And it's not about saying anybody this is a great artist. I mean, I've never gone through life like that, like cherry picking. Like I've never done that.
Right.
Right?
Right.
I'd rather work with people where there's some resonance. And that's what I felt with Andy.
It sounds like you keep a benevolent spirit too, open minded, humble, just willing to teach, but also willing to learn.
For sure.
Tell me one thing that you like about working with Tony Levin and one thing you like about working with Pat Mastelotto. And it can't be just drinking espresso.
Uh, so like to be quite honest, like with Tony, I really do enjoy the Tony himself is one of those persons who is not, he doesn't have the teacher gene, let's say,
Right.
right? But he radiates his knowledge.
Hmm.
He radiates it through what he does. And so like being in the presence of Tony and having played, as I said, like 600 plus shows with him, is just all I can ask for. And really, that is the like really my most favorite aspect of Tony is that I can learn from him by being with him. And he doesn't have to do anything in particular for that. And with Pat, it's just that he is one of the most musical people in the world.
Yeah. He's like a mad
Yeah,
professor. If anybody has not seen his drum set before, look it up. Even the other day, he posted a video and he hit these cymbals with his left hand. And I wrote to him, I was like, Pat, what are those bizarre cymbals you're hitting? I mean, he comes up with sounds that nobody's ever heard before.
but that is true. That is true. But it is about how he's hitting them.
Yeah.
Like very short anecdote for you. The very first time I visited him, which was in early 2005 at his studio, he had set up a big tom, not like a gong drum, but something like it, right? A big tom, and he hit it. He had set it up in the room, and he hit it once. It was one hit, and I had goosebumps for like
Yeah.
a minute. I know that you can imagine that, right?
Oh,
And
yeah.
it was incredible, and I was like stunned. I didn't understand like how did you do that? How did you transfer that energy and that musical experience
Yeah.
into that skin,
Yes.
right? And that was just one hit. But then what I realized is like when Pat is on stage playing, he plays, let's estimate, I don't know, 500,000 notes a show, I don't know, or 100,000, I don't know, right? And every single one is like that.
Yes.
Every single note is considered and powerful and precise and musical.
Yeah.
And that is just incredible. And I don't know any other drummer like him.
Well, I've only had one experience like that. And for a while, I was hanging out with Jerry Murata in his studios in Woodstock, New York when I was younger. And I'll never forget, I had to keep one of my drum sets in his studio for a while. And
Mhm.
I still have it. It's like a 1970s, almost like a Tony Williams Gretsch kit, really big, 24-inch bass, all this stuff. So anyway, I'm thinking to myself, Jerry's a great drummer. And so I was like, Jerry, I can't get the tuning the way I want on these drums. Can you come check them out and help me? And I'm thinking he's going to come over and tune them up. He sits down
Mhm.
and plays them, and they sound absolutely beautiful. He goes, "What's the problem?" And to
Yes.
me, when I was playing, they sounded terrible, and I thought I need to get new heads or tune it differently. But you're right. People
Uh,
like Jerry and Pat, yeah,
yes.
they just have this magic touch, and they know how to draw that sound out. And it's beyond whatever the drum set is. I remember Steve Gadd came to my high school when I was like 14, and we had this really crappy old Ludwig kit that wasn't one of the good ones. But of course, when he sat down,
Mhm.
it sounded like the most expensive, best kit in the world. So, some people have
Yeah, yeah.
that inherent talent of just drawing beautiful sounds out of whatever they use.
Yeah, I think what it is though is that it's sort of they put themselves into a feedback loop with what they're hearing. Like it's maybe like the first hit they realize, okay, this is how the drum reacts, and then immediately subconsciously they adjust their technique to making that instrument sing, and that is really like the one thing I can say, which is that's what makes you a great person, is if you're able to adjust yourself to what is happening around you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because as you know, like what people say, you can't really change the circumstances, but you can change yourself. And that's
Yeah.
in a way that is what yeah,
Most important thing to think
it's
about
true.
in life, right? Especially
Yes.
as we get older. How are you going to react to these circumstances? Well,
Yes.
listen, Markus, this has been so exciting for me. I miss hanging out with you. I'm looking forward to seeing you, but this has been the deepest conversation we've had. I just want to help you before we go. So, your website, which is probably the best place for people to go first, is markusreuter.com, and that's MarkusReuter.com. And what about social media? Are you on Facebook and Instagram? Where should people connect with you there?
Yeah, Instagram and Facebook work for sure, and I'm easy to find. Um, it's Bandcamp though,
Right.
which I would consider a social media website, let's say, but it's a music store, right?
Right.
And there's markusreuter.bandcamp.com. That's where you can find all my music, or most of it. And that's where you can follow me and where you can connect and send me messages. And there's a community there, and there's a VIP option,
Right.
and I love Bandcamp, and I regularly hold listening parties there.
Ooh, that I didn't know.
Where like I'm where I'm present in the chat also, and it's a wonderful thing. And
God forbid that's one of the only places where musicians can still make some money. So supporting anybody on there is always a good idea.
exactly.
And I love how your
Yes.
website says, if you're looking for a catalyst to spark change in your life, don't hesitate to reach out. I'm excited to offer a truly unique blend of creative art coaching. So tell me really quick. So if there's somebody out there that wants to make an album they don't know how to do, and maybe they wrote some songs, should they go to your website and email you and try to find out how to go about that and if it's possible?
Exactly. I'm doing sort of let's say a traditional service, which is you can contact me and I'll talk to you to make your dreams come true. Sounds like a cheesy slogan, but it's in fact true,
Yeah, you're like
right?
the Willy
And
Wonka.
yeah, but the good thing about that is though that no matter what you need, I can help you, right? It's like if it's something about your motivation, if it's a psychological issue, or if it's a financial issue, like if you need help budgeting for something, I can
Right.
do that as well. And I think that's sort of like what I love doing. I love to make something happen for other people. I'm really happy to assist in that sense, right? Because I think it's so important. Again, as you were saying at the very beginning, like creativity, what was the first time you were creative? And I know like some people that I meet, like that are in their late 40s, early 50s, that are like some of the most talented people I've ever met, on musical people, right? That have never considered that they could themselves be creative and actually make a record,
Right.
right? And then it turns out they make a record at, you know, 55 years of age, and it's a masterpiece, literally,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
I, and that's the sort of let's just call it service that I offer. That like if you even if you think it's too late, want to do something, you know, anything
Yeah.
really, you can come to me and I help you make it happen. That's the idea.
That's beautiful. And if you're a guitar player, if you've never heard, Reeves Gabrels started playing with David Bowie in his 40s. And then after decades with Bowie, went on and he still plays with The Cure. So it's never too late or never too early. I
Yeah.
remember Tony Williams started playing with Miles Davis when he was 17, and Miles had to go to his house and ask his mom permission to take Tony on tour. So it doesn't matter how young or old you are, right?
Exactly. And you know what? I'm hoping to see Reeves on this upcoming tour,
God, yeah.
because we're gonna play with Tuner at the Strand, somewhere in upstate New York, and I know that Reeves lives around there,
Yeah.
and I have plans to invite him
He's such a
because
good,
I've been
such a
in
good
touch with
player.
him for a while.
Such a good sense of humor too.
Yes,
I also,
incredible. I remember Earthling. Remember that
yeah,
record?
oh my God,
And
I'm about to talk to
yeah,
Mark Platty about that. I love that album.
it's a wonderful record. Yes.
Yeah, and Reeves also did a little work with Gary Oldman, another hero of mine.
Yeah.
Well, listen, Markus, thank you so much. I really appreciate you talking today, and I can't wait to see you in a couple weeks.
It's really wonderful to connect with you. And yes, see you in person very soon.